Hey there, it's Scott Kaselniak from Virtues Professional Pest Control. I'm the owner operator currently of this company, this small company on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And I wanted to start this series of pest control technician to master technician. And it's going to be a walk along journey with me um, in the ownership and hiring of employees and the training that I'm providing to them because I'm very passionate about training. I was a national training and implementation specialist as well as a training manager at my former company. And I still have a passion to teach others pestcraft. So I'm providing this for that, and I'm hoping that uh, it will help somebody out there because what pest management is about is protecting health, property, and of course, peace of mind. So I wanted to kind of get into the story of most pest professionals. So a lot of people don't get into the pest industry because they grew up and decided that's what they wanted to do. Many of us came here by accident. My story started with me, actually, it even started before me going to the police department. I was a personal trainer out of college, believe it or not. I mean, looking at me now, you would never guess. But I was doing that until the economy pretty much went south the first time we had that market crash in '08. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey, why don't you come on a ride along with me and just put your application in because, nobody wanted to have personal training at the time because it cost extra money." So I went on a ride along, and of course, I'm 23 years old at this time, and we're just buzzing around the city. We get behind a car in an alley in a neighborhood called Berry Farms, and we didn't even turn the lights on. Didn't even turn the lights on. And all of a sudden, four doors came open to the car in front of us. Two people ran that way. Two people ran the other way. And, my friend on the ride along, he ran that way. The other guy ran that way. And I got caught up in a moment. I started running too. And I got about 10 steps before I realized I need to go back to the car. And so I went back to the car and waited. But my 23-year-old self was like, "This is awesome. This is what I want to do." So I got hired by the police department, and I stayed there for about 9 years almost. But it really was never my passion. I never wanted to be a police officer. And most of the people in that career path, they wanted to be police officers. And you really need that temperament. You really need that drive when you do that because it's a very tough job. And I can say there's aspects of it that are really, really tough. Um, just to kind of like emotionally and mentally get through. So I was just done with it and I wanted to do something else. And my idea was I was going to mow lawns because something happens when you're like 30 years old and you really like mowing lawns now. Even though like when you're a teenager you hated mowing the lawn, but when I was 30 there's nothing I wanted to do than to get like a nice pair of white New Balance shoes and turn them bad boys highlighter green. Um, and just mow some lawns because a friend of mine actually on the police department was mowing lawns and was making good side money. So I was like, you know what? I can just build myself up my own route and that's it. So I got hired to a lawn and pest company and they said, well, we don't have a lawn opening, but we have a pest opening. So I said, sure. And um, I started with pest control in 2016 and I really fell in love with it. It's one of those things to where I turn to my wife at the end of every year because I was supposed to be like just biding my time until I could purchase equipment to open my own place for lawn mowing. Well, I kind of like pest control. And, every year I was like, one more year, one more year. I'm just going to do one more year. And it turns out that one more year turned into, now almost 10. So I've stayed for the career. And it's very important to kind of communicate our stories as professionals, because it isn't a sought out profession right now. And it's just such a great profession. So I wanted to take a chance to say what pest management is and what it is not. So what pest management is, it's protection of public health. At its core, that's what we're doing. We're also protecting property and investment. We're preventing the risk and damage of many different things. I mean, if you think about termites or um, rodents in like a food area, we're preventing that risk and damage. Management of biological systems. We're managing living things, so it's not exactly cookie cutter approach, right? So pest management is not just randomly spraying or spraying baseboards. It's not guesswork. It's not one size fits all solutions. We actually have to know what we're doing, know the pest, and how to treat it, and how to deliver a labeled treatment with the many different homes and buildings and many different pests that we see. You know, Pest management has always existed over time. Humans have always had pests like rodents threatening the food supply, insects spreading disease, wood destroying organisms, damaging shelters. As long as humans have lived in groups, pest management has been necessary. And it's not thought of that way in present times because it's usually kind of a side thought, right? Oh, okay, oh, it's just a mouse or it's just a rat. Well, back in the day, rats had rat fleas that caused the plague. So, they've always been around and there's always been a need for management, and there's probably going to always be a need for management. Because early pest control in the pre-modern era used very simple methods. It was like we're just going to physically remove whatever it is. Traps, fire, smoke, oils, natural repellents. These things have been around for a long time. The problem is some of them are not very effective. They had little understanding of biology. There was high disease risk back then. And also some of these solutions were just not great solutions. Like, oh, we'll just set fire to it, right? How many times did it say, you see the meme, oh, burn the house down, right, for a spider. They were literally doing that back in the day. So maybe not for a spider, but that was part of a solution. So public health was the big turning point, and it was kind of this discovery that changed everything because pests transmit diseases. Rats, fleas, mosquitoes, and flies have impact on human survival. Tick-borne disease is a real threat these days as well. But some of the examples: plague, malaria, typhus, yellow fever. There's the encephalitis, all the encephalitises, and Lyme disease, alpha gal, all these other, um, pest-borne illnesses, we'll say, that are out there. And it's really a threat to public health, and we need to be conscious of it. Modern pest management emerged in the 20th century because we started understanding insect biology and we started developing pesticides. Um, DDT was one of those pesticides, and while it's off the market now and for good reason, right? It had its role in mosquito management because mosquito-borne illness was killing more people in the wars than the bombs and guns did. So, developing pesticides to battle that was very necessary. And, sanitation and exclusion became a big thing in the 20th century, and it really helps out places who have these diseases. Um, Regulation and licensing came in. This was I believe, is a good thing. There can be overregulation, as everybody knows, but some regulation and necessary regulation and licensing is a good thing, especially when we're dealing with products that have an impact on people, pets, and the environment. Albeit, most products that we're using these days have very little impact, very little, especially compared to the other things in our environment. We still need to be good stewards, and regulation and licensing really helps. So the result: fewer disease outbreaks breaks came, safer living environments, and longer life expectancy. Most people don't know that, but pest management contributed to longer life expectancy a lot. So, as pest management professionals, this is what we do. Like, our job is very important, It's not going to go away with AI. AI is going to make maybe some of the back end um, stuff a little bit easier, or maybe a few less people doing the admin tasks. But pest control itself is largely still going to need people, um, and good people, to be stewards of our industry and to protect people and their property and the environment. And why is pest management still like it's just still so necessary, right? Because you have food contamination. The food that makes it to our grocery stores, they have to be uncontaminated. Structural damage is a real thing. Termites, gosh, termites are a big issue. Causes millions and billions of dollars every year in structural damage repairs. So if we just stop doing pest management for structural damage, like it'd be terrible. Allergens, asthma triggers, disease, even economic loss. If we're dealing with food, and we want to keep food costs down as best that we can. So having stores and place like that not incur economic losses because of pests in their food, all very important things, still relevant till this day. But there's a difference between just somebody who, the amateur and the professional, because anybody can apply a product, right? The act of sweeping webs off a home, being able to pump up a sprayer and point and direct a liquid treatment somewhere, being able to put a drop of bait somewhere, change a bait station, set a trap. These are all very easily teachable things. But what's not very easily teachable, like the thing that makes us professionals, is knowing exactly where to put them and how to have the least risk to people, property, and the environment. So that's what makes us professional. Um, so professionals, they inspect before they act. They identify before treating. If I have an odorous house ant problem, I'm not going to treat it the exact same way as I would treat a carpenter ant problem. Same, it's still an ant, but they're two different species and they have different habits. Same thing with cockroaches. German cockroaches and American cockroaches and Oriental cockroaches, we treat all those different. So we actually need to know the right identification before we even start treating. We need to inspect the right areas from that identification. Inspection and identification go together really well. And we need to use evidence-based methods of treatment. There's a lot of products out there, and products are just tools, and we have to use the right tool for the right the right tool for the right job. So this is based off of what we're seeing, evidence, uh, how things have worked, and all the information here. We're going to follow laws and labels. Performing a labeled treatment is the best thing we can all do, as a profession, to make sure that we're doing this last part, protecting people, pets, and the environment, and also for efficacy purposes. That's what the label is the law, yes, but it's also shows you how to use that product properly, the way it was intended. So let's talk about integrated pest management because we kind of touched on some of that with our prior talk, right? We were talking the last slide. So the professional approach is IPM, and that basically includes inspection, identification, which we just talked about, recommendations, which is things like prevention, habitat modification. When you can go into IPM a little bit more on the different methods of control, whether it's like, you know, um, sanitation, mechanical, and things of that nature, right? But we're going to make our recommendations and do the best we can to integrate different techniques into that. That's why it's called integrated pest management, because it's not just one thing. A targeted treatment, if the treatment is necessary. Integrated pest management is not the absence of using a product or a treatment, but it's not necessarily always using a product or treatment. It's diagnosing using these steps and then providing a targeted treatment or the proper steps to get to do it without a targeted treatment. Monitoring and follow up. Monitoring is it's the foundation. It tells us where the problems are. It tells us what the problem is. It gives us numbers. It gives us actual evidence and actionable items and what we actually need to do each time we're there. Not every single time do we need to spray everything down, right? Where we can sit there and use these monitors to know what we need to treat, along with, of course, what the customer is seeing, along with what the seasons are bringing. There's a lot of different things that go into developing a pest protocol and a pest program, but the professional approach is to use IPM. But why IPM matters is because it reduces risk. It actually improves results. A baseboard treatment is not as good as a well-targeted crack and crevice or spot treatment for certain insects. It just has no comparison. I've seen people and been behind people who have done like kind of baseboard spraying, and it just pales in comparison to taking a little extra time on the inspection, but being a little bit more targeted with the treatment. So it really matters, and it protects non-target organisms, and that's what we want to do. Is we want to go for the target organisms and not the non-targets, the beneficials. Pest management, it's about making decisions, right? It's about judgment. So when to treat, when not to treat, how much is enough, and when to educate instead of apply. So we must know that this is the things that we are going to have to do as far as decision making goes out on each property. There's a cost to poor pest management. There really is. When pest management fails, health risks increase. If we fail at um, getting rid of a rat or a mouse infestation or something like that, there's still a health risk, right? When it comes to droppings, fires, gnawing, and things of that nature. Property damage escalates, right? If our application fails and it's a termite application, we could still have damage to property. Customers are going to lose trust in us, trust in our industry. And then finally, legal and reputational risk rises. There are lawsuits out there, right, where companies have provided a service, didn't follow label instructions, and find themselves in hot water. And there's certain treatments that carry a little bit more uh, risk, like bed bug and termite treatments. So there is a cost of poor pest management. So let's talk about role of the pest management professional. As a pest management professional, we will be stewards of health, a protector of property, an educator, and a risk manager. And that role requires training, discipline, accountability, and ethics. And I think a lot of people who get into this industry and treat it just like a job, like any old job, and they miss this portion of it, that's where we get some of these shortcuts. That's where we get the lack of care. And that really echoes throughout the industry. If we get a couple bad apples, it'll spoil the bunch, right? So, when as a technician comes in, you as the technician need to understand that you are very important. You're very important. You protect property, you're an educator, you're a risk manager, and you're a steward of health. And yeah, training is a big deal. It's something that as an industry, I'm striving to do whatever part I can do to get some training out there. Discipline, accountability, ethics, these are things that will skills that when you build these, they will go across not only pest control, but any other career path you take. Standards matter. We have standards here at Virtues, and there are standards at many other companies, and they create consistency. They reduce mistakes. They protect everybody involved. It's things like PPE, where I see some people just decide that they're going to not wear PPE, and they think that it's just some company making a stupid rule, but it's actually by law through the label, and it's there to protect the person who doesn't want to be protected, even in that situation. So, it is literally there. A lot of our standards are there to protect the person involved, to protect others involved. The last thing we want is for people to get hurt in our industry. And then we want to build trust with clients. You know, if we're building trust and the customer can trust us to do the job right, and protect them, communicate, and things like that, the customer is going to want to stick with us, which allows us all to have a job, which allows us to make a living, which allows us to have a career. So we want to make sure we uphold these standards. At Virtues, we prioritize thinking before action. Okay, that's prudence, right? We're going to think, we're going to, before we act, what are the possible outcomes that could happen if I do X, Y, Z? We value prevention over reaction. We don't want to always be super reactional to things, although in our industry, you are going to be reactional. But if there's a chance we can take to do a preventative measure, we're going to take that, right? We want to communicate clearly. If there's one thing that we can do well, and that's communicate clearly and be able to do labeled treatments, we're going to do great, you know? And then we want to protect outcomes. You know, we want to make sure everything's good and not the ego, right? We don't want to think we're always the best, the best things in sliced bread in the pest control industry, or we don't want to, talk down to people because, they don't know. They're not studying this stuff. So we don't want to just stroke our ego and go out there and just kind of think like we know it all. So we want to be very humble if we can. Just remember, you represent the profession. Your decisions matter. Your words matter. This is one that a lot of people anywhere in any career field don't understand. Words and their meanings matter because it's how other people perceive what you're saying and doing. So we must choose our words carefully. That's probably a lesson in and of itself, right? If we're going to go around telling people we are going to spray chemicals all over your house, it's going to have some sort of a visceral feel to it. Instead of we're going to do a targeted treatment in the areas that need it, right? The two things that, like, that's what we're doing, right? We're doing a targeted treatment in the area that needs it. But just coming out there and choosing the wrong words makes it sound really horrible, right? Your habits matter. This is another whole lesson is habits. Daily basis, the habits you create, that's who you are. Um, and it's not just industry specific, but our habits matter. Do we show up? Do we show up on time? Do we have a habit of always contacting our customers before we go there? Is our habits to show up clean and tidy, with no off-putting smells, or not looking like we just rolled out of bed, right? What are our habits? Because it all matters. But it all boils down to you matter. As a technician, you matter so much, and you are doing the protection of the property. You are giving people peace of mind. Um, and you got to know that it's not just some job that it's like an empty job. You're going to get a lot of satisfaction out of this job helping people out. There are people who are going to give you Christmas cards. There are customers who you're going to know their kids, you're going to know dogs' names and things like that, and they'll very much become a part of your life. So understand that you matter a lot when it comes to this, because ultimately you sign your name at the bottom of uh, the the slip. So you want your work to be a reflection of you. Just remember, with pest management, it's not just a job. Okay, it's a standard, it's responsibility, it's a potential career. And at Virtues, technicians can advance to master technician, and leaders can take a leadership track to management. And even in not in Virtues, but in the pest control industry, there are many different jobs that I don't think people are fully aware of. So, on the technician level, you have commercial technicians, residential technicians. There are technicians who have leadership skills and they'll be team leads at places. There's also trainers who are technicians. There's many different levels of management: service manager, branch manager, technical directors, sales managers. If you're in a company with a national level, there are specialists, directors, VPs, and of course, there's ownership, right? So there are many different levels that you can go to. There's actually options in there, and you probably not know which option you want to go for the first year. But I can tell you, many places are hungry for good candidates to be in these management roles and to be in these leadership roles. So it's very important to know that this can be a good career option for you. So, with that said, that is the introduction to the pest industry. I hope you found it informative. We're going to get into more technical talks later, but I just wanted to kind of give an overview of the industry and kind of, if because most people, when they come into this industry, they're very new to the industry. So I'd love to be able to just kind of shine a light on it because I truly believe it's one of the most underrated industries out there. It is an awesome industry. It really is. And, there are, I know technicians who I used to work with, like as a technician, they were buying houses, even in this market, in this terrible market. Now they were go-getters for sure, but I think this industry has a lot to offer, and I'm excited for everybody who chooses pest management as an industry. Until next time, I'll see y'all.